Welcome to the deep dive. So, you asked about using milk for powdery mildew on plants, and we're digging into it today.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You want the key info fast without getting lost in the weeds, right?
Exactly. So, we're focusing on making sense of this natural remedy.
We've got a couple of good sources. There's a video showing it in action, in a vineyard.
Okay.
And also this conversation, someone called Oma explaining it all to Kesser and Steen. She seems to know her traditional remedies.
Right. So, our mission today, figure out how milk tackles powdery mildew and, how you can use it effectively.
Let's do it. First things first, the problem itself. Powdery mildew. What is this stuff?
Good question. PM, people call it sometimes.
Yeah, PM. It's a fungus, a really common one, actually. Attacks loads of plants.
Right.
Roses, grapes, squash, apples.
You name it.
And it looks like powder, right?
Pretty much a white or grayish powdery layer. And here's a key thing. It's usually on the top of the leaves.
Like spilled flour or something. But it's not just sitting there looking messy, is it? It's actually hurting the plant. Oh, definitely. It's not just cosmetic. This fungus, it feeds on the plant.
How does it do that?
It uses these tiny little suction things. Think microscopic straws. They're called haustoria.
Haustoria. Okay.
And they go into the plant cells and just suck out the nutrients, the sap, weakens the plant, slows growth, fewer flowers, less fruit. Not good.
And there's a specific type for things like squash and roses.
Yeah, the one that often hits squash, cucumbers, roses, apples.
Yeah.
That one's called Ariciphe vanicator.
Right. Definitely want to avoid that. Which brings us to the surprising solution, milk.
Exactly. Seems almost too simple, doesn't it? Just ordinary milk diluted with water.
Oma really pushes this in her chat with Kesser and Steen, yeah. Did they sound skeptical?
Well, the title we saw even asks, milk for PM, is that for real? So yeah, definitely some initial, reactions. Understandable.
Sounds like an old wives' tale, maybe.
Could seem that way. But Oma apparently has this background in traditional methods, and she makes a strong case. Plus, the video shows someone actually using it in a real vineyard setting.
Okay, so maybe not just a myth. So let's get into the science. This is the really interesting part. How can fridge-staple milk fight a fungus?
This is where Oma's explanation to Kesser and Steen gets fascinating. It comes down to a specific protein in milk. It's called lactoferrin.
Lactoferrin, okay. What's special about it?
Well, it's got these antimicrobial properties. It can actually stop microorganisms from growing.
Really?
It's what they call an iron-binding glycoprotein. Bit of a mouthful, I know.
Yeah.
Basically, it loves to grab onto iron. It was found way back in 1939, understood better in the 60s, but using it for plants came later.
And who figured that part out?
That was a Canadian researcher, Peter G. Collin. Back in the 90s, he was looking into alternatives to chemical fungicides.
Makes sense. Concerns about chemicals were growing then.
Exactly. And he found that diluted milk worked surprisingly well against powdery mildew, especially on squash plants.
So how does grabbing iron help fight the fungus? Oma explained this to Kesser and Steen.
She did. It works in a couple of ways. First, by binding up the available iron. Lactoferrin basically starves the fungus. Microbes need iron for their essential processes. No iron, no growth. Or much slower growth, anyway.
Okay, so it limits their resources. What's the second way?
There's also evidence it can directly damage the microbial cell membranes, so it pokes holes in their defenses.
Wow. So starve them and attack their walls. Pretty effective.
Seems so. And both sources, Oma and the video, stress it works preventatively and on contact with the existing mildew.
But wait, there was something else too, something the video mentioned.
Yes. Sunlight. The UV light. That's another key piece.
Sunlight, how does that factor in?
Well, when UV light hits the milk proteins, especially lactoferrin and certain amino acids, it creates these things called reactive oxygen compounds.
Reactive oxygen, like tiny bleach molecules?
Sort of. Think of them as natural little zappers that are harmful to the fungus. That's why the person in the video sprays in bright sunlight.
And why it wouldn't work in a greenhouse, right? Because the glass blocks UV.
Exactly. Plus, Oma added that some other milk proteins can also interfere directly with the fungus's cell walls and its enzyme activity. Messes things up for the fungus.
Okay, that's a powerful combo. Lactoferrin stealing iron and damaging walls, other proteins interfering, and sunlight creating little fungal attackers.
You got it.
All right, practicalities. How do we actually use this? What kind of milk works best? What's the recipe? Oma used skim milk, didn't she?
She did mention skim milk to Kesser and Steen, but the video host clarifies it's the protein that matters, not the fat.
Ah.
So skim, low-fat, whole milk, They should all work fine. The video does suggest organic if you're trying to avoid any potential residues, from non-organic farming practices.
Makes sense for a natural approach. And the dilution, how much milk to water?
Both sources point to a 10% or 20% mix being most effective. So 1 part milk to 9 parts water for 10%, or 1 part milk to 4 parts water for 20%.
Which translates to?
For 20%, that's like 1 liter of milk and 5 liters total liquid.
Yeah.
Or 2 liters milk and 10 liters. For 10%, it's 1 liter milk and 10 liters total.
Okay. 1 in 10 or 1 in 5, roughly. Got it. And the video host even said this can work as well as some chemicals.
Yeah, apparently some studies showed it performing on par with, or even better than, certain conventional treatments, especially curative ones.
Wow. Okay, any tips for mixing it up?
The video suggests putting a little water in your sprayer first, then the milk. Helps it mix better, maybe less foaming.
Good tip.
And interestingly, the milk doesn't have to be super fresh. Even frozen and thawed milk can work. Just try to have the milk and water at a similar temperature when you mix.
Useful if you've got some milk nearing its date. Okay, application time. When and how do we spray?
Key thing,
Ah.
sunlight. Spray when it's sunny because of that UV activation we talked about. Not ideal for indoors or deep shade.
Makes sense.
And spray thoroughly. You want to wet the top surface of the leaves really well. That's where the mildew usually hangs out. Wet it until it's almost dripping, but don't just drench it so it runs right off.
Top surface is critical then. What about the undersides?
Covering both sides won't hurt. But the main target is the upper side, especially on new growth. That's the most vulnerable.
And how often? Is it a one and done thing?
Definitely not. You need to spray regularly. Plants are always growing, putting out new leaves, new flowers, especially grapevines, as the video showed.
Right, so new surfaces are constantly appearing that need protection.
Exactly. The protection doesn't last forever, and the plant keeps expanding. Consistency is key.
Any other little tricks for spraying?
Yeah, the video mentioned adding maybe just a tiny drop of neutral, unscented dish soap.
Why soap?
It acts as a surfactant, helps the milk mixture spread out more evenly on the leaf surface and stick a bit better, rather than just beating up. Just mix gently. You don't want loads of bubbles.
Okay. And any special equipment needed?
Nope, just a standard garden sprayer.
Oh.
Doesn't need to be fancy or expensive. The video shows a simple setup. They were spraying right after pruning the vines on a sunny day.
Sounds pretty accessible. Are there any catches? Warnings? Things to be careful about?
Yeah, few important points. First, remember it's a contact treatment. It only works where it touches the fungus.
Okay.
Second, that interesting legal point the video raised, particularly for places like Denmark or the EU.
About calling it pest control.
Right. If you market something specifically as pest control, it usually needs official approval. But the video host had a clever thought.
Which was?
Maybe you're not using it for pest control. Maybe you're just foliar feeding or doing something else beneficial for the plant. A potential workaround, perhaps.
Interesting way to frame it. Did the video mention other home remedies, too?
Briefly. Things like baking powder, soda.
Yeah.
But suggested that's a whole other discussion, especially with changing rules.
Fair enough.
And it also connected powdery mildew sometimes to underwatering. So always good to check the plant's basic needs, too.
Good point. And Oma had a warning for Kesser and Steen, didn't she, about being responsible?
Yes, she really stressed that.
Yeah.
Whoever's doing the spraying needs to be careful,
Yeah.
particularly thinking about bees and other helpful insects.
Like, don't spray directly on bees.
Exactly. Just being mindful of the whole garden ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder whenever you're spraying anything, really.
Definitely. Now, Oma also talked to Kesser and Steen about the difference between this milk spray for mildew and something called foliar feeding or blagdening. What was that distinction?
Yeah, that was a really helpful clarification from Oma. It's about where you apply it and why.
Okay.
So for milk against powdery mildew, we said target the top surface of the leaves because that's where the fungus mostly is.
Right.
But for foliar feeding, that's when you're trying to give the plant extra nutrients through its leaves. You actually want to spray the underside of the leaves
The underside. Why there?
because that's where most of the stomata are. Those tiny pores plants use to breathe.
Okay, stomata. I remember those from biology.
Well, they don't just exchange gases. They can also absorb nutrients that are dissolved in water, especially micronutrients. The underside usually has way more stomata than the waxy topside.
So the plant can drink the nutrients better through the underside.
Exactly. Oma used a great analogy for Kesser and Steen, feeding a baby. You aim for the mouth, the underside, for nutrients, not just wipe food on its face, the upper side.
That makes perfect sense. So timing might matter for foliar feeding, too.
It does. Those stomata, they tend to be more open early in the morning or late in the evening when it's cooler and the plant isn't losing as much water.
So that's the best time to feed through the leaves.
Generally, yes. The plant is more receptive then. So top side for milk versus mildew, underside for nutrients. Different jobs, different spray locations.
Okay, great distinction. Let's pull this all together then. Key takeaways for someone wanting to try milk for powdery mildew.
Okay, main thing, yes, milk can work. It seems the lactoferrin protein, especially combined with sunlight, is effective.
And how to use it.
Dilute at 10 or 20% milk and water. Spray thoroughly on the top surfaces of the leaves. Make sure it's sunny when you spray.
And keep doing it, right.
Absolutely. Regular spraying is crucial, especially as the plant grows new leaves and flowers. Consistency pays off.
So we started with a listener question about a simple garden tip.
And ended up talking about iron-binding glycoproteins, reactive oxygen compounds, and plant stomata.
It really shows there's often real science behind some of these traditional or simple-sounding remedies. It's not just guesswork.
Exactly. Understanding the why helps you do it effectively. Knowing why sunlight matters or why the top surface is key.
This was really enlightening. It definitely makes you think, if milk works this well for powdery mildew, what other everyday things might have surprising, undiscovered uses? Maybe for plants, maybe for something else entirely. What potential is just sitting there hiding in plain sight?
That's a great thought to end on. Lots to explore out there. Until the next deep dive, keep asking those questions.
Welcome to the deep dive.